Billionaire won the divorce and smiled. Not knowing his wife's family controlled IT, all the sound of a pen clicking shut didn't just mark the end of a marriage. To Robert Barker, it was the sound of checkmate. He straightened his Brioni tie, watching the woman he'd vowed to cherish forever sign away what he believed was her last claim to his empire. He thought he'd executed the perfect heist, keeping the penthouse, the offshore accounts, and his billion-dollar reputation, while leaving her with pocket change and her dignity in tatters. But Robert forgot one fundamental rule. In a game of corporate chess, you don't celebrate capturing a piece when you haven't noticed the Queen's family owns the board. He was about to discover that some victories are just elaborately disguised executions. Before we dive into this jaw-dropping courtroom showdown, I need you to do something. If you love stories where the underestimated rise up and the powerful get their comeuppance, hit that subscribe button right now. Because this channel, we're building a community of people who believe justice isn't just for those who can afford it. Every like, every share, every comment telling us your thoughts, it all helps us bring you more stories of people who refuse to stay silent. Now, let's see what happened when this billionaire realized he'd underestimated the wrong woman. The recessed lighting in the Chicago family court cast a sterile glow that usually made Robert Barker feel claustrophobic. Today, however, it felt like a spotlight illuminating his greatest triumph. He sat at the polished oak table, leaning back in his Herman Miller chair with the relaxed confidence of a predator who'd already tasted blood. His posture radiated victory, legs crossed, fingers steepled, a man completely at ease with the moral compromises he'd made to get here. Across the narrow aisle sat Rosemary. She looked different today, quieter, somehow diminished in a way that satisfied something dark in Robert's chest. She wore that elegant cream-colored dress with the off-shoulder cut, the same one she'd worn to their anniversary dinner 3 years ago, back when he'd still pretended to care. Her dark hair fell in soft waves around her face, partially obscuring her expression. The pearl earrings he'd given her after his first major acquisition glinted under the fluorescent lights. Even now, she had grace. It irritated him. Robert's attorney, Marcus Weinstein, a silver-haired assassin who billed $850 an hour to dismantle families, leaned over and whispered, "Stop smiling like that. At least try to look like this hurts." His tone carried amusement. They both knew Robert had won. "You're taking everything. The least you can do is act like it wasn't the plan all along." Robert smoothed his expression into something resembling remorse, but internally he was already planning the celebration. The divorce had consumed 14 months of legal warfare. Rosemary had initially fought for their estate in the Berkshires, a stake in Barker Industries, and a fair split of their accumulated wealth. But Robert had been strategic. Years ago, long before the marriage started fracturing, he'd begun moving assets into a complex web of shell entities, limited liability companies in Delaware, trusts in the Caymans, cryptocurrency wallets registered under corporate aliases. He'd buried his fortune so deep that a forensic accountant with unlimited resources would need years to trace it all, let alone a woman whose primary occupation had been philanthropic work and managing their household. "Mr. Barker," Judge Elizabeth Morrison intoned, peering over her reading glasses with the weary expression of someone who'd seen too many marriages end badly. "You agree to the terms of the revised settlement, a lump sum payment of $50,000 to Mrs. Rosemary T. McDonald Barker, full ownership of the marital properties and dissolution of the marriage with all claims waived." "I do, Your Honor," Robert said, his voice carrying just the right note of reluctant acceptance. He'd practiced this moment. "It pains me deeply that our relationship has come to this, but I want Rosemary to be able to move forward with her life. I hope this settlement provides her with a foundation to rebuild." It was a masterclass in calculated cruelty disguised as generosity. $50,000. The same amount he'd once spent on a watch he wore twice. The same amount he'd dropped on bottle service last month when celebrating the Series C funding round with Amber, his 27-year-old brand consultant, who'd been occupying his bed and his Tribeca loft for the past 18 months. Rosemary didn't look up. Her attorney, a middle-aged man named Frederick Henderson who'd come recommended by some family connection Robert had never bothered to investigate, patted her hand gently. She reached for the pen. Her fingers were steady. That surprised Robert slightly. He'd expected trembling, maybe tears, a visible manifestation of her defeat. Instead, her hand moved with calm certainty as she signed her name on the settlement agreement. Scratch. Scratch, scratch, done. The marriage was legally over. Robert felt something unlock in his chest, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying for years. He was free, free of her quiet judgment, free of her persistent questions about his business practices, free of her annoying insistence on quality time and meaningful conversation. He kept the penthouse with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lincoln Park. He kept the McLaren and the vintage Porsche. He kept Barkertech Industries, the company he'd built from a garage startup into a billion-dollar unicorn. And best of all, he could finally stop pretending. No more secret hotel rooms. No more encrypted messaging apps. He and Amber could be seen together publicly. His real life could begin. As Judge Morrison declared the proceedings concluded, Robert stood, buttoning his suit jacket with the casual confidence of a man who'd just won the lottery. He felt magnanimous, generous even. He walked across the aisle to where Rosemary was gathering her belongings, a simple leather purse, a worn notebook, her phone. "Rosemary," he said, keeping his voice low, almost gentle. She stood slowly, her movements deliberate and unhurried. When she finally looked at him, her eyes, those dark, intelligent eyes that had once looked at him with something like love, were completely dry. No redness, no puffiness, no evidence of emotional devastation. They were clear, almost eerily calm, regarding him with an expression he couldn't quite identify. Was it resignation, acceptance, something else entirely? "Robert," she replied, her voice steady. "Look," he continued, lowering his voice to a tone of conspiratorial concern, "I know 50,000 isn't much in the grand scheme of things." He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "But if you ever need help, maybe a reference for a job, something in communications or event planning, just reach out. I won't hold any of this against you. Water under the bridge." It was a calculated insult wrapped in benevolent packaging. He wanted to see her crack. He wanted her to raise her voice, to cause a scene, to prove to everyone present that she was the unstable one, the emotional liability he'd been right to leave behind. He wanted vindication. But Rosemary didn't crack. Instead, the faintest smile touched the corners of her mouth, not a happy smile, but something more enigmatic, almost knowing. "That's very generous of you, Robert," she said quietly, her tone giving away nothing. "But I think I'll manage. My father is picking me up, actually. He's waiting downstairs." Robert almost laughed. "Thomas, that old consultant is still working. What's he driving these days? Still that ancient Mercedes?" He couldn't hide the condescension in his voice. Thomas MacDonald had always struck him as profoundly boring. A retired businessman who spent his time on charitable boards and gave vague advice about long-term thinking and institutional memory. The kind of man who wore 20-year-old suits and talked about integrity instead of quarterly returns. Irrelevant, harmless. Rosemary didn't answer. She simply picked up her purse, turned, and walked toward the courtroom exit. Her heels clicked against the marble floor in a steady, measured rhythm. She didn't look back. Robert watched her go, feeling a strange mix of triumph and something uncomfortably close to pity. She was going back to whatever modest life she'd inhabited before she'd had the good fortune to marry him. Back to quiet obscurity. She was no longer his concern, no longer his problem. She'd been an acceptable companion when he needed the appearance of stability for investors and board members, but that phase of his life was over. Now he could focus on what really mattered: growth, expansion, power. He turned to Marcus, who was packing documents into his leather briefcase. "Drinks on me. The most expensive scotch in Chicago." "You've earned it," Marcus grinned, the predatory smile of a man who loved winning almost as much as he loved billing hours. "You didn't just win, Robert. You committed highway robbery in broad daylight," and she signed the permission slip. "I'll be writing a case study on this one." They walked out of the courthouse together, emerging into the crisp autumn afternoon. The Chicago skyline stretched before them, glass and steel monuments to ambition and achievement. Robert checked his Patek Philippe. 2:47 p.m. By 6 o'clock, he'd be celebrating with his team. By 9, he'd be with Amber, finally able to take her to that Michelin-starred restaurant where reservations required 6 months' notice and connections. His new life was already in motion. The celebration took place at Apex, an invitation-only rooftop lounge in the Gold Coast, where membership cost more than most people's annual salary, and a single cocktail cost more than the settlement he'd just given his ex-wife. Robert stood at the railing, looking out over the city he'd conquered, a glass of 30-year-old single malt in his hand, and felt like a god among mortals. He had no idea that at that exact moment, 60 floors below in a wood-paneled office he'd never heard of, his former father-in-law was making a phone call that would turn his kingdom into rubble. The elevator to Robert's penthouse moved with the near-silent precision of German engineering. He stood alone in the mirrored car, studying his reflection with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for artists admiring their masterpieces. His hair was perfect. His suit, custom-tailored on Savile Row, fit like a second skin. His Patek Philippe caught the overhead lighting, throwing tiny rainbows across the elevator's interior. He looked exactly like what he was, a winner. The elevator chimed, and the doors whispered open directly into his penthouse foyer. 3,200 square feet of marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and contemporary art that most museums would kill to acquire. The late afternoon sun poured through the western-facing windows, bathing everything in golden light. From this height, Chicago looked like a circuit board, ordered, controllable, his to command. "There he is," Amber's voice rang out from the living room. "The man who just pulled off the heist of the century." She appeared in the doorway wearing a black cocktail dress that left very little to the imagination, holding 2 champagne flutes. Her blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders in calculated disarray. At 26, she had the confidence of someone who'd realized early that beauty was currency, and she was exceptionally wealthy. "Technically, it was a legal settlement," Robert said, loosening his tie as he walked toward her. "But yes, I'd say it went well." "Well," Amber laughed, handing him a glass. "Baby, you just walked away with everything. The penthouse, the company, your reputation intact, and you left her with basically nothing. That's not well, that's legendary." She clinked her glass against his. "To Robert Barker, the smartest man I've ever met." "To freedom," Robert countered, taking a long drink. The champagne was Krug Clos d'Ambonnet, roughly $3,000 a bottle. It tasted like victory. Amber curled onto the white leather sofa. "Tell me everything. Did she cry? Did she make a scene?" Robert settled into the chair across from her. "That's the strangest part. She didn't cry, she didn't fight, she just signed. Very calm, very composed." "She's probably in shock," Amber said, examining her manicure. "When she's back in whatever apartment she can afford on $50,000, it'll hit her." Robert walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city spread beneath him like a kingdom awaiting orders. "You want to know the beautiful part? It took me 2 years to set this up. 2 years of moving money through shell companies, Nexus Holdings, Triumph Ventures, entities in Delaware, trusts in the Caymans, cryptocurrency wallets under corporate aliases. Every dollar buried so deep that even if she'd hired the best forensic accountants in the world, they'd need a decade to trace it all. That's genius, Amber breathed, joining him at the window. You're like a financial magician. It's just planning, Robert said, but pride crept into his voice. Most men make the mistake of waiting until the marriage falls apart to protect their assets. I started the day I realized Rosemary was deadweight. She wanted meaningful conversations and quality time. I wanted to build an empire. We had incompatible goals. Amber pressed against his side. And now you have everything. The penthouse, Barkertech, your future, and you have me. She looked up at him through mascara-thick lashes. No more sneaking around. We can finally be seen together. The Met Gala, Fashion Week, Davos. Robert pulled her closer, feeling the weight of years of pretending lift from his shoulders. No more boring charity dinners with Rosemary discussing philanthropy. No more questions about his late nights at the office. No more judgment in those quiet, knowing eyes. He was free to live the life he'd earned. Fast cars, expensive restaurants, a beautiful woman who understood that success was meant to be displayed, not discussed in hushed, humble tones. Look at that city, he said, gesturing at Chicago's glittering skyline. 5 years ago I was nobody, a startup founder begging for meetings. Now, I built a billion-dollar company. I own this penthouse. I dictate terms to venture capitalists, and I just executed the perfect financial divorce without losing a single asset that matters. Amber raised her glass. To the King of Chicago. To the King, Robert echoed, and the champagne fizzed gold in the dying light. Below them, the city pulsed with evening energy, millions of people rushing home, going to dinner, living their small lives. From 40 stories up, they looked like ants, predictable, controllable, irrelevant. Robert had spent his entire adult life climbing above the crowd, and the view from the top was intoxicating. He'd won. He'd beaten the system, beaten his ex-wife, beaten everyone who'd ever doubted him. He had no idea that while he'd been sleeping, his former father-in-law was preparing the first moves that would dismantle everything. Robert, thank God, David answered immediately. We have a serious problem. Ascension Partners triggered Section 7.3 last night. They're calling an emergency board meeting. They're exercising the acceleration clause on the convertible notes. The convertible notes weren't due for 26 months. They can't do that without cause. Material adverse change in company leadership. They're claiming your divorce destabilizes their investment. And Robert, they've coordinated with Silverman Ventures and Chen Capital. Together, they control 42% of voting shares. They're calling for an emergency review of executive leadership. Robert gripped the counter. They're coming after my position. They had everything prepared, legal language drafted, board notifications ready. Someone orchestrated this. David paused. And 3 of your shell companies were served with patent infringement litigation. The patents are owned by subsidiaries of McDonald Global Industries. Your ex-wife's family. The name landed like a physical blow. Thomas McDonald. But what Robert didn't know was that Thomas McDonald had been planning this for years. Within hours, Robert's perfect life would begin to crumble. Stay with me. You won't believe what happens next. Robert woke at 6:47 a.m. to his phone vibrating against the nightstand like an angry wasp. He reached for it blindly, his head thick from too much champagne and too little sleep. Amber was still unconscious beside him, her blonde hair spread across the silk pillowcase. The penthouse was silent except for the muted hum of Chicago traffic 40 stories below. The screen displayed 18 missed calls, 12 from David Chen, 3 from Marcus, 2 from the board members, 1 from his head of investor relations. Robert's stomach tightened. In 8 years of running Barkertech, he'd never woken to 18 missed calls. He sat up, suddenly alert, and dialed David back. His CFO answered before the first ring finished. Robert, thank God, We have a serious problem. It's not even 7 in the morning, Robert said, keeping his voice low to avoid waking Amber. He walked into the bathroom and closed the door. What kind of problem requires 12 phone calls? Ascension Partners. They triggered Section 7.3 of our funding agreement at 11:47 last night. They're calling an emergency board meeting for 9 a.m. today. Robert, they're exercising the acceleration clause on the convertible notes. Robert's mind raced through the implications. Ascension Partners had led their Series B round 3 years ago, injecting $340 million that had transformed Barkertech from a promising startup into a unicorn. The convertible notes weren't due for another 26 months. They can't do that without cause. The notes are locked until 2027. Section 7.3, David repeated. Material adverse change in company leadership or stability. They're claiming your divorce represents a destabilizing event that fundamentally alters the risk profile of their investment. Robert almost laughed. That's absurd. My personal life has nothing to do with company performance. Our Q3 numbers exceeded projections by 18%. We're about to close the Meridian acquisition. This is obviously a negotiating tactic. They want better terms on the Series C. Robert, they had the paperwork ready. Legal language drafted, board notifications prepared, everything. This wasn't spontaneous. They've been planning this. David paused. And there's more. They've coordinated with Silverman Ventures and Chen Capital. Together, they control 42% of voting shares. They're calling for an emergency review of executive leadership. The bathroom suddenly felt smaller. Robert gripped the marble counter, his knuckles whitening. They're coming after my position. It appears that way. I've been up all night reviewing our shareholder agreements, and Robert, there are provisions buried in the Series B documents I'd never focused on before. Very specific language about founder retention and stability requirements. This is a power play, Robert interrupted, his mind already calculating responses. VCs do this all the time. They manufacture a crisis, force a negotiation, and extract better terms. It's textbook, but even as he said it, doubt crept in. The timing, less than 12 hours after his divorce was finalized, seemed too precise to be a coincidence. Maybe, David said, though he sounded unconvinced. But Robert, the coordination concerns me. 3 major investors moving in lockstep overnight. That level of alignment doesn't happen spontaneously. Someone orchestrated this. The elevator to the 42nd floor, his floor, refused to move. Robert swiped his access badge again. The security panel blinked red. Invalid CREDNTIALS flashed across the small screen. That's impossible, Robert muttered. He jabbed the button for the lobby and descended with mounting fury. When the elevator doors opened, the lobby looked wrong. Too many people clustered in small groups. Security personnel he didn't recognize stood near the turnstiles. Michael Torres, his head of security for 6 years, approached with an apologetic expression. Robert, Michael said, his voice low, I need you to come with me. I need you to fix whatever IT disaster disabled my access badge, Robert countered. Michael glanced at the unfamiliar security personnel. Sir, I've been instructed to escort you from the building. Your access has been revoked by order of the emergency board resolution passed at 7:15 this morning. The lobby noise seemed to fade into a dull roar. What resolution? The meeting isn't until 9. They moved it to 7 a.m. Mr. Barker, I'm sorry, but you're no longer CEO of Barkertech Industries. The board has installed David Chen as interim chief executive pending a full leadership transition. Michael's expression was genuinely pained. Your personal items from your office are being packed now. They'll be couriered to your residence by end of day. Robert felt the marble floor shift beneath him. You didn't call a board meeting, vote out a founder CEO, and execute the removal in less than 2 hours. That required coordination, preparation, legal review, weeks of work, not overnight execution. "I'm calling Marcus." Robert's phone was already at his ear. Marcus answered, and his tone told Robert everything before he spoke a word. "Robert, where are you?" "In my lobby being told I've been fired from my own company. What the hell is happening?" They accelerated the meeting. Ascension Partners, Silverman Ventures, and Chen Capital moved in unison. They had a fully drafted resolution, legal justification, and 5 other board members who voted with them. "Robert, it was 11-2. They didn't just remove you, they sealed the building, disabled your access, froze your equity disbursements pending a forensic audit." Marcus paused. "And Robert, there's more, bad more." The lobby was spinning now. "What more?" "3 of your shell companies, Nexus Holdings, Triumph Ventures, and Barker Family Trust, were served this morning with patent infringement litigation. The claims are substantial, well documented, and they're seeking immediate injunctions and seizure of assets pending trial." Robert's hand tightened on the phone. "That's impossible. Those entities are clean. I've never—" "The patents are owned by subsidiaries of McDonald Global Industries," Marcus continued, his voice grim. "Robert, every single legal action hitting you right now traces back to companies owned by or connected to the McDonald family. Your ex-wife's family." The name landed like a physical blow. Thomas McDonald, the boring old man with the ancient Mercedes, Rosemary's father, who Robert had dismissed as irrelevant. "Sir," Michael said again, more firmly now, "I really need you to leave." Robert looked around the lobby of the company he'd built. Employees were openly staring now. The security personnel had moved closer. Someone's phone camera was definitely recording. He could see it all unraveling in real time. His reputation, his control, his carefully constructed empire crumbling like a sand castle at high tide. He walked out of his building with his head high and his stomach in freefall. Behind him, the glass tower that bore his name gleamed in the early light, suddenly foreign territory. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Welcome to the consequences of underestimating quiet people. Thomas McDonald wasn't even hiding anymore. The next 24 hours taught Robert what it felt like to watch a life disintegrate in real time. It started with his offshore accounts. At 2:37 p.m., his private banker in the Caymans called with actual fear in his voice. "Mr. Barker, I'm calling to inform you that all accounts associated with Nexus Holdings Limited have been frozen pursuant to international seizure warrants." The orders came through simultaneously from the U.S. Federal Court, the Cayman Financial Authorities, and Interpol. "I've never seen coordination like this." Robert's hands went numb. "Frozen." "For how long?" "Indefinitely, pending investigation into alleged financial crimes." "Mr. Barker, I'm advised to tell you that our institution can no longer maintain a relationship with—" Robert hung up. He pulled up his Swiss accounts. Accounts suspended. Liechtenstein Trust, unavailable. Singapore accounts. Access DENIED. One by one, every financial fortress he'd spent years constructing was locked, sealed, unreachable. "Baby, what's wrong?" Amber emerged from the bedroom. "You look like you're going to be sick." Robert went to his laptop, opened the encrypted wallet containing his cryptocurrency holdings. 42 million in Bitcoin and Ethereum, completely untraceable, his ultimate insurance policy. He logged in. The balance read 0, every wallet empty, drained. The transaction history showed systematic transfers between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., already confirmed, irreversible, gone. His phone rang. "Marcus. Robert, have you checked your property titles recently?" "What are you talking about?" "Your penthouse. It's held by Barker Family Trust, which is held by Triumph Ventures." "But Triumph Ventures is owned by a parent company being foreclosed on by a subsidiary of McDonald Maritime Holdings. They own the debt structure. They're calling it due. You have 72 hours to vacate." A text message popped up. From Amber. I'm sorry, but I can't be part of this. My lawyer says being associated with you could expose me to legal liability. I've taken my things. Please don't contact me. Robert looked up. The bedroom door was open, her closet empty. The bathroom counter cleared. She'd packed and left while he was watching his life disappear. Even her champagne glass from last night was gone. By midnight, Robert sat alone in the penthouse that wasn't his, drinking scotch he'd paid for with a card that no longer worked, watching his email inbox fill with termination notices, foreclosure warnings, and legal summonses. One text message stood out. You spent years hiding wealth you thought was yours. Now you know the truth. It was always mine to give and mine to take away. You were just borrowing it. TM, if you're as hooked on this story as I am, smash that like button and drop a comment telling me what you think Robert deserves. And hey, share this with someone who loves justice served ice cold. Your engagement helps me bring you more incredible stories. Now let's see just how deep this goes. Robert found a private investigator named Garrett Stone through Marcus. $5,000 for the consultation, his last functioning credit card. They met at a Chicago suburb coffee shop. Stone slid a manila folder across the table. I can tell you who's destroying you in one word, but you're paying me to show you how deep it goes. Inside was a corporate ownership chart that looked like a spider web. At the center of every connection, McDonald. McDonald Global Industries, McDonald Maritime Holdings, McDonald Ventures. The name appears in virtually every entity you've interacted with for 8 years. Robert's finger traced the lines. Ascension Partners is connected to McDonald Ventures. This can't be right. Ascension Partners is a wholly owned subsidiary. Gerald Hutchins is just a well-paid employee. Stone flipped pages. Silverman Ventures. McDonald Capital owns 47%. Chen Capital. Cross-ownership agreements going back 30 years. The law firm you used for offshore entities. They've represented McDonald's interests since 1987. Your Cayman Bank. Board member overlaps with McDonald Maritime. Every lawyer, every banker, every investor, all connected to McDonald. Your crypto security firm, founded by a former McDonald's global IT director. They had your keys from day one. Robert felt like falling. Why? Stone tapped a wedding photo. You married Thomas McDonald's daughter. He funded you, protected you, built infrastructure around you. You weren't self-made, Mr. Barker. You were a McDonald project. Then why destroy me now? You divorced his daughter and left her with $50,000. The McDonald family controls more wealth and power than most people realize exists. And you insulted them publicly. How do I fight this? Stone closed the folder. You don't. They're an institution. They're patient, they're everywhere, and they've been planning this since you signed divorce papers. My advice, disappear. Change your name, start over, because if you stay in their crosshairs, there won't be anything left. The next day, a courier in a dark suit delivered a cream-colored envelope with a wax seal. Inside, elegant script, Mr. Thomas McDonald requests Mr. Robert Barker's company for dinner at the Penn Club, Thursday at 7:00 p.m. This is not a negotiation. This is a courtesy. The Penn Club's private dining room had dark wood paneling and oil paintings of industrial titans. Thomas McDonald sat at a corner table in a navy blazer, looking exactly as Robert remembered. Distinguished, unhurried, utterly unremarkable. Robert, thank you for coming. Please sit. They were alone. Thomas unfolded his napkin with deliberate care. I imagine you have questions. I thought it would be more civilized to answer them in person. You destroyed my life, Robert said, his voice raw. Thomas looked at him with pity. No, Robert, I took back what I gave you. There's a difference. The McDonald family operates on a simple principle. We don't make noise. We don't appear on Forbes lists. We own things quietly, move carefully. Real power doesn't announce itself. I built Barker Tech. You had talent, I won't diminish that. But 8 years ago, Rosemary mentioned her husband had an interesting idea. She was proud of you. So I made one call to Gerald Hutchins. I told him to look at Barker Tech, be generous with terms, and make sure you succeeded. Robert's hands clenched. I was a charity case. You were my daughter's husband, the Series B funding, I approved it. Did the acquisition offers you turn down? I killed them. The regulatory approval for Europe, I know people on the commission. Every board member, every investor, every partnership, all touched by McDonald's influence you never saw. Why help me at all? Because my daughter loved you. When you keep someone successful and wealthy, you keep them happy. I thought that would keep Rosemary happy. Thomas's expression hardened. I was wrong. Success just made you cruel. For 8 years I protected you. I ran interference on stupid decisions. I quietly bought out investors who wanted you removed. I funded your lifestyle through structures designed to make you feel self-made. Because that's what Rosemary wanted, a confident husband. And you used that gift to humiliate her in court, giving her $50,000 while hiding assets that came from my family in the first place. Every success, every victory, all Thomas MacDonald letting him feel important. So what now? Robert whispered. Now you learn what happens when McDonald's protection withdraws. Everything you had, gone. Every open door, closed. You're not a tech mogul. You're just a man who mistook temporary grace for permanent achievement. Robert leaned forward desperately. You're wrong about one thing. For 3 years I've been collecting insurance. Trade secrets, proprietary algorithms, client data, all encrypted with dead man switches. If I don't check in every 72 hours, it goes to your competitors, the media and regulatory agencies. McDonald's global acquisition targets, shipping algorithms, AI strategies, and offshore holdings communications, enough to cost you billions and trigger federal investigations. Thomas reached into his jacket and slid a tablet across the table. Open it, Robert's files, every document. How did you open any file? Read it. Robert selected McDonald Global M&A Pipeline 2025-2030. The information was completely fabricated. Nonsense. He opened another, more useless data. His stomach dropped. 3 years ago, I told my head of security I was concerned you might steal from us. He said we couldn't prevent it, but we could control what you stole. Every document you accessed was placed for you to find. We watched you build your insurance policy for 3 years. Your nuclear option is a prop. You have nothing. Robert's final play was a theater. They'd always known. So here's your actual choice, Thomas said calmly. Option 1. By morning, you're facing federal charges for corporate espionage and extortion, 15 years in prison. Option 2. You disappear. New name, new city, new life. There's an envelope at the front desk with a bus ticket to Phoenix and $5,000 in cash. If you're not on that bus tomorrow morning, you've chosen prison. Thomas stood. For what it's worth, Robert, you did have talent. If you'd been a better man, you might have actually earned what I gave you. He left, and Robert sat alone, finally understanding the complete scope of his irrelevance. Robert had lost everything. His only choices were prison or exile. But 2 years later, Thomas MacDonald would make one final visit that would show Robert exactly what he destroyed. You need to see this ending. 2 years later, Rob Baker stood behind the counter at Tech World in a Phoenix strip mall, helping a teenager choose phone cases. Employee of the month twice. His manager said he had natural talent for explaining technology. Rob always smiled at the irony. The studio apartment was 400 square feet. Murphy bed, closet, kitchen. He'd lost 30 pounds, cut his own graying hair with clippers every 2 weeks. Rob Baker looked nothing like Robert Barker. That was the point. On a slow Tuesday afternoon, he heard the door chime and looked up. Thomas MacDonald stood just inside, wearing khakis and a polo shirt. Older than Rob remembered, but unmistakably the same man. "Hello, Robert," Thomas said quietly. "It's Rob now. I know, I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to close the loop." Thomas withdrew a magazine, Forbes, glossy and new, and placed it on the counter. The cover showed a woman in a tailored suit before floor-to-ceiling windows, her dark hair pulled back professionally. She held a 2-year-old girl on her hip. The headline, "The New Queens of Tech, How Rosemary McDonald Built a Billion-Dollar Empire." Rob's legs went weak. "She merged 3 companies in 18 months, Thomas said factually. "Created one of the most innovative technology conglomerates in the industry. She's brilliant, always has been, you just never noticed." The little girl had her mother's dark hair. "Her name is Lily McDonald. She's 2.5. Smart as hell, just like her mother. She'll grow up knowing she comes from a family that builds things that last." He paused. "She'll never know she had a father named Barker. That name has been erased from every record that matters. The birth certificate lists the father as unknown. Legally, biologically, historically, you don't exist in her life." Rob's throat closed. "I thought you should know, not to be cruel. But because you need to understand what you actually lost. It wasn't the money or the company or the penthouse. It was this." He tapped the magazine. "This was always what mattered, and you traded it for nothing." Thomas McDonald walked out, the door chiming like a period at the end of a sentence. Rob stared at the magazine, at Rosemary's success, at the daughter who would never know his name, at the family he'd thrown away because he'd been too arrogant to see what he had. The magazine sat on his coffee table for months. He'd look at it late at night, studying Rosemary's face, imagining conversations he'd never have with a daughter he'd never meet. Eventually, he threw it away. But the image remained burned into his memory, a permanent reminder that he'd spent years believing he was self-made when he was always just a talented employee who mistook investment for opportunity and temporary grace for permanent achievement. Rob Baker went back to work, helping customers with phone cases, living a quiet, anonymous life in Phoenix, carrying the weight of everything he'd lost and would never get back. Some men learn too late that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in what you destroy to get them. Robert Barker had won his divorce with a smile, never knowing Rosemary's family controlled it all. He thought he was the shark, but he was always just bait. He spent years building an empire on borrowed power, then lost everything, including his daughter, the moment that power was withdrawn. The McDonald family never made the news. They never appeared on Forbes lists. Real power doesn't announce itself with press releases and penthouse parties. It moves quietly in wood-paneled offices, making phone calls that reshape lives, controlling outcomes from the shadows. And Robert, he learned the hardest lesson of all. You can't con your way out of a game when you never realize someone else owned the board. So there you have it. One of the most satisfying stories of karma I've ever covered. Robert Barker thought he'd won, but he was playing a game he never understood against an opponent he never saw coming. If this story gave you that sweet taste of justice, do me 3 favors. First, smash that subscribe button if you haven't already. I bring you stories like this every single week. Second, hit the like button to help this video reach more people who need to see it. And third, drop a comment below and tell me, did Robert get what he deserved, or was Thomas McDonald too harsh? I read every single comment. And if you're craving more stories about karma and revenge, check out the video on your screen right now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.